take the metal pipes and put them in place, hammer it, lift it up again, drop it back down, and do that, because that would provide a one ring or a series of rings that are not interlocking, whereas core drill number 7 is the best example of where they actually must use some sort of a modern style drill to get these perfect holes that they had when they were building the pyramids. They just used some type of a drill. They were vastly technologically advanced in the ancient world. Believe me, some of this stuff still exists. Today we can't even build a bridge that stands for more than like 100 or so years. All right, so the site that we were looking at is down here. Here is Mount Ararat and Mount Ararat the Lesser, so greater and lesser. We're looking around, so here's the mountain range, go around the mountain on this side of the mountain to this little village here called the Village of the Eight. Significant? The Village of the Eight. When we go to the Village of the Eight, we find these stones all over the place. You can actually see there's Mount Ararat in the background. This stone is 10 feet tall or 12 feet tall. There are about 4 to 5 feet of the stone that are buried in the ground. There are crosses all over the stone. These are crusader crosses all over these stones. So people are like, oh no, these are not anchor stones, these are not drogue stones, they're not associated with Noah's Ark, they're from the Crusaders. They put these crosses here and they carved all of this stuff. So they said, okay, let's go digging. So they went digging, and they found stones that would not have been visible when the Crusaders were there, and guess what? No crosses, yet we still have the drogue stones. They still have the holes in them. There is evidence of wear in some of them. You could actually see the wear pattern. Let me be clear. There's could be evidence of wear on all of them, but some of them the wear pattern is much more visible. And when you're looking at the top of the holes, many of the holes are actually carved. Once you get inside of the hole, it actually expands, and there's a larger expanse on the inside of the hole than on the outer edges. And this would have allowed ropes went in, and they had the knots tied on them, that the knot could slip in and then had room to expand within the hole, which would have helped prevent the knot from slipping out. And these are just more examples of, this is how thin the stone is. These are more examples of the crosses on these drogue stones. So National Geographic did a documentary on Noah's Ark. They were looking to say, okay, there's a story of a Noah's Ark that's a circle. There's a story of one, the back of a turtle. There's one that says it looked like a pyramid. There's another one that says it looks like this. So they built a wave pool, and they built all sorts of different models from all of the different stories of a flood and a vessel that survived the flood. They put them all in the wave pool, and every time they put them in, what do you think happened? They would flip, they would roll uncontrollably, they would sink, they would break. None of it worked. Until they did something. They went through and they used the drogue stones from that area, and they built little model drogue stones, put them beneath the vessel, put the vessel back in, and something happened. But they cut that particular portion of the presentation from the documentary. So I'm going to show you, is there sound? If I play a video over here, will there be sound? Now, maybe if I just turn up the volume. That's what I'm doing. Turn up the volume and then put the... Oh, there's another mic there. Okay. So I myself have not seen the full presentation of this because I've tried to watch it. It's not available. But this is what has been removed from the documentary. Okay, why is sound not working? Okay, sound does not want to work. Is there a volume button back there that you could turn up? Maybe it will work there. Yeah, it's no volume here. Go right ahead. There we go. I hear it.
To find out whether Noah's supposed technology works, Day has added weights beneath the model ark. This time, he's programmed in even bigger waves.
Now that, without the deck, would definitely have been over.
Amazingly, the ark survives the giant wave impact. The stabilizing anchors have worked. Without them, the ark would have turned over.
Imagine that. The one piece of evidence throughout the documentary that would have shown that it was possible for Noah's Ark to not have tipped over in the massive waves of the flood, and it was excluded from the documentary. What would be the purpose? Say that discredit any possibility that Noah's Ark could have actually happened, and that we've got evidence for it.
So that was that city of 8 where all the dreadstones were. How are all the dreadstones there with the ark?
They do find them other places, but there's a very large concentration of them near that village. And there's some theories ranging from that happened, that was the valley where the ark was just kind of floating through that valley, and where there was calm waters finally, that there might have been something in the water in that particular area that was making the ropes fall apart, whether it be cutting them or they just were at their purpose and they just started dropping like flies. But there, you could actually follow a trail where they're actually visible. And one of the other things is that they've had to dig some of these to find them. So there weren't as many when they were initially looking at this location, but they have found more now that they know what they're looking for. So it's possible that there could have been many more other places within the region. They just don't know what they're looking for. And landslides, and if something is big enough to carry away, it will be carried away. People like their souvenirs. So there's multiple reasons why we can't find more. We do not know how far the ark traveled. It has been theorized that it could have went completely around the world. It's been theorized that God kept them at generally the same location, just in that particular area floating above, Turkey. It's been proposed that it was, somewhere else, and that God then pushed it over towards where Turkey is. Some people believe that Turkey is where the Garden of Eden was, and so God put them back exactly where they started from to literally give them a second chance from the same location. Some people think that the Garden of Eden was other locations. That's something I can, speak on later if there's time. But as far as the concentration in this village, once they realized, hey, people are interested in these, all of a sudden, let's go digging. What can we find under the ground? And so they went and they started digging to see exactly what they could find. But chances are this was the valley where, Noah's family, let me go back. And we also don't know when they're standing up, when they're standing up in a valley like this, we don't know if this isn't the collection zone. So what I mean by collection zone is people find them and then bring them to that location for either safekeeping or further study. This is what happens when you're digging at an archaeological site, is they'll try to recreate it how they think it's supposed to look. That's what they did with Stonehenge. They've tried to recreate it how they think that it was supposed to look. That's what they did with the pillars at that great theater, I believe it was in Ephesus. The pillars weren't standing, and then all of a sudden, once the excavation's over, the pillars are standing. This is what they did with the ziggurat of Ur. It was in a very dilapidated state when they first started looking at it. Now when you look at it, it looks pristine and perfect, and it's because they had the materials either right there at the base of the ziggurat, or they had it in the general vicinity, or they said, other ziggurats have looked like this, so this is how we're going to recreate it. So there's multiple theories on why there would be, such a large concentration there. But that particular valley seems to be where the ark was residing in this. It's about, I think, 8 or 12 miles, as the crow fly radius around this whole region from Mount Ararat to the site where we're looking at it now, over to this one. It's just that general vicinity. All right. These are housed in the National Museum of Armenia, the Natural History Museum. They don't realize what they've got, because this was the equivalent of I visited Noah's Ark and all I got was this t-shirt. Lots of people would go, we have the historical records where they would go to visit Noah's Ark like a tourist site. They were interested in it, and they would go home with trinkets or souvenirs. This is what, remember earlier today, we talked about St. James, where he brought back a relic. These are also be something along the lines of relics that could have been purchased in that general vicinity. And hey, we've got Noah's Ark. Hey, this one's a little harder to see. This one is a gentleman who is offering a sacrifice. But it still tells the story of Noah's Ark, and they don't even realize what they've got at this museum. They've got the evidence of the flood. Earlier we had talked about Gilgamesh. This is the Gilgamesh seal with Noah surrounded by water. That's one of the things that we see. We also see ancient structures in that general vicinity. So this is a picture from the 70s and 80s. I forget the exact date that it was taken. But this was in the valley. They see individuals walking. The walls can be approximately, knee-high, thigh-high. Here's a picture of maybe a little niche in a window or the wall. Once the locals realized what was going on here, they were digging for treasure, and all of this got demolished, gone. It got knocked down. This is what it looked like, I think when they went there in 2012 or 2015. So that building that we saw is now level with the ground. Nothing there. But then, during 2020 and the preceding years, the Turkish government decided that, hey, let's go take a look at this. So they started an excavation, and they started digging at this site. And so now it's an actual archaeological site in Turkey, and some of the researchers that were on this project stated last year that Andrews has now joined them on this. I can't find any confirmation from Andrews, so I'm just going based on what the posts were that were made by the archaeological team that was working on this. They are? Yeah, sometimes it's... Okay, so have confirmation from Andrews that this is actually happening. I looked and looked and looked. One of the problems with archaeological sites is that a lot of times they don't publish the results or that they're even working on something until 5 years, a decade after they've actually worked on the project and they have some sort of tangible results or a study that they want to actually get out there and say, hey, we did this, this is our information that we're ready to release to the public. They don't want to be premature in explaining, hey, what this is, and then it turns out to be wrong. So sometimes it can be very difficult to get confirmation on what's actually happening. Okay. Here's an overhead view of this site. These are called test pits. And what test pits are, or individual pits, you can choose to dig open pit, where you can have the little test pits. The little test pits are good because it provides an original sample of the soil that you're digging in. And it gives the column of the layers of the earth as you're digging. So if you have a question about something later on and you're like, oh, I forgot to, what type of soil is this? Was it clay first and then pea gravel and then sand? Or was it cement and then sand and then pea gravel? If you have a question, you can go back to your site and you can look at layers of soil from the pit you were digging in. Open pit, that is what they were using at Jamestown, where they were just removing all of the soil from the entire site that they were looking at and leaving the building foundations exposed as they go without removing them. Sometimes they'll do this when they're examining a body. They will leave the body in the site, and then when they're completed all of their research and they've made sure that it's not a recent burial, they will leave that body in position, or sometimes some of the artifacts, take pictures, and then cover the site back over. It all depends on the agreements that they have made with the people that are sponsoring the site and the people that are in charge, and the government rules at the time. So in one of these test pits, I think that this may have been a type of a furnace, and that this is where the furnace would have been, and this may have been a storage or a work area or a kitchen. But like I said, these were preliminary studies, so they're not for certain 100%. But the walls were very thick. By my estimations, it looks to be about 6 to 8 feet thick. So very, very thick walls. And they have not reached the bottom yet. So originally the walls were, 2 to 4 feet above the ground level. They've now dug down below the ground level, and there's still more to go. And this is just more views of this dwelling here. This could have been a house or a feature, a building that was built on top of something that Noah would have lived in. Or it could be a much later dwelling that somebody built just for the fun of it, or because Noah did live in that region. A lot of times you'll find, it was considered an honor to be buried near your ancestors. That's why Caleb specifically asked for, hey, I want Hebron. Give me the city of Hebron. What was so significant about Hebron? It's the cave, the double cave, the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were buried. So it was considered an honor, and there's thousands of graves in that region because everybody wanted to be buried close to that. Same thing with the temple. If you go to Jerusalem, the current Temple Mount, if you look directly if you're facing the Temple Mount, if you look directly to the right, there's a hill there that's just covered in tombs because it was considered an honor to be buried near something of significance as well as your dead relatives. It's claiming your heritage. This is what I was talking about earlier when you asked the question about an altar. So in back of the dwelling, there is what would appear to be an altar. There are marks in the rocks where cattle have climbed up it so often that they've actually made indentations where they would climb up. Off to the side over here, there's actually loops where you could actually tie your animal there until you were ready for the said sacrifice. And from this location, facing back towards the valley, it's like a natural amphitheater. You can speak there and you can hear it across the valley. Now, there is another proposed location for a city. There's talk of a lost city from some of the ancient records that there was a city that was built near Noah's Ark. We don't necessarily know everything that was associated with that city. However, when we do the LiDAR scans, and there was a little boy, I think he was like 12 or 14 years old, that was looking over LiDAR scans for South America, and using the LiDAR scans was actually able to find an ancient city in South America. So this researcher, who was using LiDAR scans, has identified thousands of some type of structures, whether they be fire pits, altars, fences, but there's all types of different structures, areas where tents had been staked down, all on the hill up here next to the Noah's Ark site. So the proposed location, that's where it's thought that it originally had sat, and then when the mountain, there was a mudslide, it slid down to here. The site of the proposed city, where we can see on the LiDAR scans that there is definitely evidence of human civilization there, is up here on the backdrop of that U-shaped mountain that is talked about in France. And it does meet, that legend that says, hey, you go here, there's a city, here's this mountain of this particular shape, and it does seem to match the evidence from the historical records. On the border between all the countries, remember I said that this site sits on the border between Turkey, Iran, and Armenia. They found some stones, and they appear to have been from a previous memorial. They decided to make a new memorial, and when some of the people that were making this new memorial got back home, they looked at their footage, and you can see where there's paint on the rocks. Well, when you view the camera footage, you can see the shapes, and when they put the shapes together afterwards, it would appear as if you would get this picture that had been painted onto the original memorial. All right. Family affair. We're going to look at a passenger manifest. Bible says that as in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the time of the end. So as in the days of Noah, they were wicked, times now, wicked. Were there a lot of people that said, hey, let me on board that boat and here's my luggage, where do I sit? So we're saying it's not option A, it's option B. 8 people out of a lot of people. Bible says in Genesis 7:7 that it was Noah, his sons, his wife, and their 3 wives. 8 people in total. Now, population growth, the Bible talks about how they had sons and daughters, which would indicate more than one son and more than one daughter. So if we have just 4 people and we did this population growth rate, we would end up with a lot of people at the end of just 1,650 years, well into the billions. Sons and daughters. When we're looking at population rates since 1800 is estimated that there were about 1 billion people on the planet. From the year 1800 to now, the population has exploded. Particularly once we get to about 1974, it's almost doubled since 1974. That's just 200 years, 225 if we want to be exact. Think of everything that's happened during that time. We've had floods, we've had famines, we've had natural disasters, we've had world wars, we've had Great Depressions. So if we are looking at a population growth rate that mimics our current population growth rate right now, starting with just 2 people and going 1,650 years, If it mimicked the population rate, growth rate today, at the time of Noah's flood, there would have been just under 9 billion people on the planet. And you got to remember that these people were perfect. They were built in the image of God. Yes, there had been sin introduced, but they weren't these degraded bodies like we see now. They had very, very healthy animals if they wanted to eat meat. They had almost perfect fruits and vegetables. Sin hadn't caused such an effect on the food sources at that point, and the world had a lot more land. It didn't have as much water, it had a whole lot more land. If we were to slow the growth population rate down to practically nothing, we'd end up with about 45 million people. And out of all of those, how many people got on the ark? 8. As in the days of Noah. We were warned. Are we going to have gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs of people that God's coming back for? As in the days of Noah. That's a scary thought. After the flood, we have our table of nations. This is Genesis chapter 10. This is the 70 men that are listed, where we can trace just about every single nation on earth. And the ones that we can't trace is simply because they lost their record somewhere, and we just don't have that piece of information in the puzzle. So we end up with something that we call a genetic bottleneck. I'm going to finish taking a picture there. All right, did you get it? Okay. We end up with something called a genetic bottleneck. So Adam and Eve had every gene known to man. Absolutely every gene known to man. When they have children, the numbers of the genes that are available drops. So we get a variation. There are 2 huge events in biblical history that severely reduced our genetic makeup. What do you think those 2 events are? Flood, what else? One's the flood, the other one's the Tower of Babel. Because before that, the people were all together. After that, the people got separated. They had to go to their own little corner into time out. So when you start separating population groups, you are limiting the variation in genes that each group has access to, unless they physically get up and travel over to the other group that hopefully has new genetic diversity to bring back to their own group. Yes. So what ends up happening? We end up having very little genetic diversity. Let's explain it via flowers. Because God says unto the 3rd and the 4th generation, its knowledge of God can also be removed within that amount of time, but it also is in the genetics. So if something happens in generation 1, it will affect all of the preceding generations. So generation 1, we have capabilities of having red flowers, pink flowers, and white flowers. Every possibility known to man. In the 2nd generation, though, we've got some choices that we can make. And based on the choices that we can make will depend upon our genetic viability. So if we go with the 2nd choice up here, future generations will have all of the genetic variability, and we're back to square one. But if we choose to only take certain traits, like pink and white, when we're going through here, our possibilities are either all white, a mix of pink and white, or all pink. If we stick with just the all white flowers, we have just excluded 75% of our genetic makeup. We will never have another pink flower, and we will never have another red flower unless we add something to this. All preceding generations of flowers must be that color unless we physically introduce another aspect. Same thing with down here. If we go with the all reds and we only get the seeds for the red flowers, we will then only, from that point on, only be able to reproduce the red flowers. If we mix the red and the pink, we'll have some genetic variability. But if we don't, we will lose all genetic variability. We see this in the animals, and this is how we see this in the animals. We see this through things like elephants. We have African elephants and Indian elephants and Asian elephants. They're all pachyderms. They're all elephants. Are they identical? What's the differences? Their trunks. What's another difference? Their ears. What's their tusks? Little hand in the back. What difference do you see in these elephants? On the other one, there's only one. Yep, so the trunk has one finger on the Asian, but there's two fingers on the African elephants. African elephants are typically much larger than Asian elephants. They're all still elephants, though. Have they morphed into something different? No. But what separates the two? Several thousand miles. So distance, that's all it takes. And within 3 generations, you will have a permanent split between the species varieties. You will not see anything different unless you actually add the 2 species back together and hope that you can get some new genetic variation. This is a genome. This is a healthy genome. We've got lots of different genes. So each line here is a gene, and each line across here is an individual. So this is the information for about 100 people. This is a very healthy genome. This is a not so diverse genome because we have certain traits that there is no variation. So if we end up with a trait that's not so desirable, like we're missing a toe, and that is picked up on that gene, and that's the only copy of the gene that we can pass along to the offspring, all of the offspring henceforth will be missing that toe because of genetic defect. So that's why this would be considered a not so healthy population genome, where this one is. And this is the difference between what it would have been like pre-flood versus post-flood, where they were originally and our sad, pitiful state now. All right, we also have a genetic link to the flood through our DNA. Most people, when you're looking at DNA, they think nuclear DNA. This is a cell, so touch your arm, pinch your arm. What are you touching? You're touching cells. You got billions of them. And inside of each cell is a nucleus with your own unique DNA that's unique to you, and if you have an identical twin, your identical twin. Inside, go back. Clicks the wrong button. Inside of the cell, see these green things right here that kind of look like a kidney bean? Those are called mitochondria. Those are the cell's powerhouse. That's what gives your cells energy. Your mitochondria have what is called mitochondrial DNA. A mother will pass down her mitochondrial DNA to all of her children. Boys can't pass that along. So it dies out if she has a son. However, if she has a girl, her daughter will then pass that mitochondrial DNA, an exact copy of it, down to her daughter. And then her daughter will pass it down to her daughter, and you can trace the mitochondrial line on a straight female line back to trace where somebody came from through their DNA. A lot of the DNA tests that are done for, regional DNA, oh, I came from here, they're looking at the mitochondrial DNA as well as nuclear DNA for more close relatives. But if we're looking for, you'll hear haplogroups used a lot, this is what they're looking at, the haplogroups, the original groups, because every so often there's a quirk in the genetics and the gene will have just a little change to it, and you can track those. We can track those because there's also something called Y chromosomes. Guys have Y chromosomes, where a man will pass it down to his son, will pass that down to his son, pass it down to his son. The male chromosome, Y chromosome, when they're looking at ages for it, does not extend as far back in variations as the female line. This can be explained because of Noah's flood. See, every man on this planet right now is a descendant of whom? Adam, but who else? Noah. All of the males in the entire world are descended from Noah. But guess what? The females aren't. Because the females who were on the boat all had different mothers. We know this through the DNA. So we have to go back further in the genetic line to find one single original female. They call her mitochondrial Eve. And more than likely, it was Eve. And then for the men, they call him Y chromosome Adam. And most likely, that would have been Noah. So we can actually see in our very DNA the remnants of the flood. Were Noah's sons triplets? Well, that's a question I get asked a lot. But to understand if they were triplets, we actually have to go to Terah. See, Terah, we're told, was 205 when he died. We're also told that Abraham didn't leave Haran until his dad died, and Abraham was 75 when he left Haran. So that means that when approximately Terah was 105 or 130, he had Abraham. Yet Abraham is listed as the first son in the line. That's because when we're looking at the order of the sons, Haran, Moses actually writes it out. Haran died before his father did. So therefore, his name and all of his descendants got pushed to the back of the descent line. Back they go. Shoop. Abraham and Nahor then get moved forward. So the son that was born when Terah was 75 years old was actually most likely Haran. But because he died first, listed last. And then Abraham then assumed that place. So it should have been this order. Now let's go back to Noah. All right. It says Noah at the time of the flood was 600 years old. 2 years after the flood, Shem has a son. Shem's son is born when Noah is 602, because 100 plus 2 is 602. I'm sorry, 600 plus 2 is 602. But it also says in there that this son is born when Shem is 100 years old. So if we take 100 years old 2 years after the flood, how old was Shem at the flood? 98. So if Noah is 600 at the flood and Shem is 98, if we take 602 and we minus 100, we get Noah's age of being 502 when Shem is born. That's Genesis 5:32. We can go through and take a look at that, which Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Well, the word Ham to describe him as the younger son or the youngest son is the same word that is used to describe the position that Jacob held compared to Esau, and that Benjamin held in the position of the family, and that David held. It literally means youngest son. And Genesis says, Noah woke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. So we now know that Ham should be at the back. He shouldn't be at the front because he's the younger son. But if Noah's 502 when Shem is born, and Ham's the youngest, so that means that he was born after Shem, which son was born when he was 500 years old? Had to be? Yeah, Japheth. So Japheth then gets moved to the front of the line. But then, when we look at Genesis 10, it actually comes out and says, Japheth was the elder son. So there we go. Japheth first, then Shem, then Ham. But what are the implications because of this. Why is it Shem, Ham, and Japheth? A lot of people say, oh, it's because Shem got the birthright. Well, let's look back to Terah and his sons. Why was Abraham listed first? He got the birthright, but Moses actually spelled it out for us there. Says, Haran died before his father did. He didn't spell it out for us with Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Most likely is that, this one. Most likely is that Japheth died before Noah did, which means that he lived less than 350 years after the flood. This is just based on looking at, the charts, what the Bible says, and the order of the sons. But it's the most plausible theory that we have. So, no, they were not triplets. They were born at varying ages of Noah. All right, did Noah's Ark have a floating aquarium? No. How do we know this? How do we know that Noah did not decide to bring a whale shark onto the boat? Yeah, the Bible does say so. It says, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, and all that was in the dry land died. So there were animals outside of the boat that God must have had a protective shield on, that he made sure he had a specific number out where he saved them. But all of the living souls, see, animals don't have a soul because they can't think. They can't make the conscious decision, hey, I want to follow God. They're not given that opportunity. So all souls that were outside of the ark died. But all the souls inside of the ark survived. So how did they all fit? There was a lot of animals. Everything after their kind. But kind doesn't mean breed. It's something very different. If you look at it on taxonomy, the word kind is the equivalent of family grouping. So when we're looking at a family grouping, it would be something along the lines of, are these all felines? Yeah. These are all felines. So there would have been representatives from the feline family. What about canines? These all dogs? These all canines? Yeah. There were no Pomeranians or, poodle doodles that were on the ark. Those are modern breeds. There were canines. They've actually just recently finished a study where they were looking at the genetics of the different canine species. They said that they've been able to trace it back and that the original canine was actually some form of a great wolf. And then they tried to splice genes of a dire wolf in with the great wolf. Yeah, man's still trying to do amalgamation. So if we're looking at family groups, actually our number then gets cut way, 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 way down. We have all sorts of different family groups. But now we have a problem because in addition to the family groups, we have a specific number that we have to take. For clean animals, it was by sevens, the male and his female, and by unclean animals, by twos, the male and his female. So how many tigers were on the ark? 2 or 4? There were 4. Because if we're looking, we go by the clean animals. They were told to take them on by sevens, the male and his female. If there were only 7 sheep, somebody disobeyed, because where is his female? The word twos actually translates in Hebrew as 2 couples of twos. So therefore, if twos translates that way, the sevens also translates that way. So instead of being 7 sheep, it was actually 7 couples of sheep, which meant 14 sheep. We want more genetic diversity. This would have added a whole lot more genetic diversity to all the animals that we're getting on the boat. So now we've broken it down. Okay, we've got family groups. Now I didn't go through and decide, how many of each group is clean or unclean. So this is an estimate of approximately how many animals were on the boat, not including, hey, there's extra because of the clean animals. So without specifying clean animals, we would have had this number, which is approximately just over 2,100 animals to fit on this boat. So now we're going to the space. So now we know how many. Let's look at the space. We have 3 levels. We know the dimensions of the ship, so we know how much floor plan space that we have. We have just over 3 acres of space that we have to fit all of the animals. We have to fit all of our food and anything that we want to take with us to restart society. So that gives us just over, 44,000 feet per level, or 44,000 square feet per level. So if each individual animal was given cages of approximately these sizes, so if each individual frog of the 4 frogs got its own 2x2 cage, if each individual rabbit, there's 4 of them, each one gets its own 10 foot by 10 foot cage, then this is the amount of square space that we would need. But does each individual rabbit need a 10 foot by 10 foot cage? No. We could probably put all 4 rabbits in a 6 foot by 6 foot cage, and that would be sufficient. So, but going with these individual cage sizes, it would take up this amount of square feet, or 90,000 square feet, which would mean that we would still have 1 acre of free space. But that's not taking into account, as we saw earlier, the rooms in the ark have varying sizes, specifically designed for each individual animal. So they weren't something like this. It would have been more something along the lines of this, making the most of every little square inch that we had. A giant game of Tetris. Yep. And the animals were probably very, very young. God hand-selected these animals to make sure that he would have X amount of each one and the best of the species. All right, environmental effects. You think there were some environmental effects as a result of the flood? There were some big ones, because we started out with the water that never rose above its borders, and then all of a sudden, we've got water that covered everything. I think that was a big environmental effect. How much water? So if we just go with ocean level, sea level, right now, and we go with Mount Everest, at 15 cubits above Mount Everest, how much water do you think that was? I had to do the calculations on that, and I hate math. I actually did them. It would be this amount of gallons. Or 452 trillion Olympic swimming pools. And that's just if they were sitting on top of sea level. That doesn't include all the water that's currently in the oceans today, which, by happenstance, probably all of it is remnants of the flood. It's all still floodwater. The sand is all of the shells and things that have been broken up over the years. So the next time you go to the ocean or a really large body of water and you're dipping your toes in, just remember, that's the remnants of billions of dead things. Have fun at the beach! Right, this is just telling you how far above the water, above the mountaintops the water went. We know that the water covered the mountaintops because we found fossils of fish at the top of mountains, which means that the mountains were covered with water. Found lots of fossils of fish. We find closed fossils. So bivalves, typically what would happen with a bivalve fossil is that when the critter inside dies, the shell opens up so that something else can come inhabit the shell. But what happens when it is quickly buried underneath of tons of dirt is that the shell cannot automatically open. So the shell then gets stuck just like this. We find billions of these all over the place. Folded rock layers. The water oversaturated the rock layers. If you tried to do this with rock layers now, rock is hard, it would shatter. But these are like batter. It's like they were poured out. And this shows when they're looking at how rock formations are formed and what would cause this. The rock had to be extremely soft. Sometimes it was actually mud that then formed into rocks later on. We see this in the mountain ranges. A really good example is Sidling Hill. If you're ever driving down 70, that's probably one of the closer. There might be some if you go out west. I don't know of any other ones. I know on the East Coast, this is one of the most publicized ones. There were a lot of volcanoes that were going off at the time of the flood. You don't picture volcanoes going off the flood, but there were. The evidence says that there were actually over 90 volcanoes they can't account for in written history that were most likely all going off at the same time. Ones that are the size or bigger as Yellowstone, all going off at once. Now, what do you think? We've seen the evidence of just one volcano going off. One volcano going off caused these type of events. The Minoan eruption, otherwise known as the island of Santorini or the island of Thera, it blew up. We can date that to about the time of Joseph and the 7-year famine. It's approximately the same time frame. Mount Tambora blew up and caused the year without summer across the globe. They were actually on July 4th having to use an ice pick to bust through the ice on the water barrels that were in Williamsburg and Jamestown, Virginia. And they were having to light the fires in the churches in New England at the same time because it was so cold. One that blew up in 535 in Indonesia. They're not certain which particular mountain, but they do know that one did go off there. It was actually the Kickstarter for the fall of Justinian, King Arthur, cities in Mexico, and also helped kickstart the 1260 days because that is what led the Ostrogoths to fail and to crumble beneath the Romans. All right, this is George Frederick Dodwell. He was the lead astronomer for the Australian government for about 40 plus years. I think it was like 43 to be exact. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, and he went through and he compared all of the ancient records. And as he's looking at the ancient records from the Babylonians and the Scythians and the Chinese and Cambodia, from all around the world, he determined that their numbers were off. But it only made sense if when they're calculating the star positions, if the Earth had a different tilt. So he laid them all out, and he said, okay, what are they looking at here? What are they looking at here? What are they looking at here? If I changed the tilt, what constellation would I be looking at this particular time? And he figured out the angle of the tilt, and to see that constellation and to see this event in space at this particular time, that the Earth would have had to have been tilted at a certain degree. And he was able to calculate the variations in the degrees, and he calculated that some massive event somewhere around 2345 BC occurred to knock the Earth off of its axis. And it caused a wobble in the tilt, which he then says would have led to what we would call ice ages and varying degrees in temperatures. And this is some of his original notes showing how this wobble would slow in time. That's not to be confused with the circumference and the curvature of the planet. That was done many, many years before George Frederick Dodwell, and that's how they were able to calculate how big the Earth was without actually having to get a tape measure and actually measure the Earth. They had two people stand at different places, measured the variation in the degrees, and then figured out, well, if we wanted to get the degrees the same, we'd have to have a curvature of this, which means that to have a full sphere, this would have to be the curvature of the Earth. So the difference between tilt and curvature. But George Frederick Dodwell hypothesized that because of this, anywhere between 600 and 1,000 years after the flood, they were prone to sudden drastic changes in temperature. This would account for things like these, which had originally been hypothesized as being killed in the flood, but there's no water in their lungs. Some of them have green, lush grass still in their throats and in their mouths that they were eating. They were just frozen in place. If they went through a sudden drastic change in the tilt, whether they're pointing towards the sun or away from the sun, within 8 minutes, we lose the light from the sun, and within a very brief amount of time, they went from tropical temperatures to negative degrees, instant freeze. All right. Inconsistencies with volcanic rock and potassium argon. When they're testing volcanic rocks, it releases the rocks once they form and they're in a solid state. They start releasing argon and compare the potassium and the argon to determine how old the rock is. Problem is that they've done studies around the world with places like Mount St. Helens and a series of volcanoes in New Zealand where they've been monitoring them. They literally see the lava come onto the surface of the earth. Before it reaches the surface, it's called magma. Once the lava is on the surface of the earth, they literally watch it form into a solid rock. Then they test it, and they get dates anywhere from 20,000 years to 3.5 million years old. And they literally watch these rocks form. So the potassium argon dating with the volcanic rock, not necessarily accurate. Coal, so the University of Pennsylvania took 10 coal samples. They did carbon dating tests on the coal samples. You're not supposed to get a carbon date on coal samples because supposedly it's millions of years old. You cannot get an accurate carbon dating with coal beyond 60 to 80,000 years. 80,000 is usually at the top of what they'll register when they're giving you your results. After that, it's so nil that they just ignore it most of the time. But when they tested these coal samples, the coal samples all had carbon in them. Should not be there. How was coal formed? Well, you need peat. Peat is dead, decaying organic matter. That can be a person, an animal, plant life, compacted. You need pressure, you need water. Electrical current helps speed up the process, not required, but it does speed up the process. When that all gets compounded, it then turns into coal or oil. Oil tends to be more of a marine life. Coal tends to be from more of the land life. But Dr. Harold Glenn Coffin, he had a lot to do with both coal and fossil growth patterns. When Mount St. Helens blew up, he was one of the first people there to study it. And he proved that a lot of the things that they were saying, hey, this takes millions of years to form, or this is how it formed in the evolutionary theory, he's like, look, you just said it took millions of years, didn't take so long. So this is Mount St. Helens before, Mount St. Helens after. See all the logs in the lake? These log positions, he's like, this perfectly matches what we're seeing over here. But he also said that to form a coal bed, you would need for 1 foot of coal, you need 10 feet of decay or peat. This is then confirmed again in a Nat Geographic article. It takes 1 foot of coal to come from 10 feet of peat. I actually probably said that backwards. 10 feet of peat to get 1 foot of coal. This is a small coal bed. Probably, a foot or two, which means that, 10 to 20 feet of dead decaying organic matter. When we start getting into coal beds like this, where it's 80 feet of solid coal over 4,000 acres, what does that tell us about all of the dead decaying matter at the time of the flood? Oh yeah, because 1 foot of coal equals 10 feet of decaying matter. So 80 feet of coal, 800 feet over 4,000 acres, floating mass on the ocean. This is not the only large coal bed, but it is the one that has the great looking trucks. Nice big trucks. There's a coal bed over in India. It's the largest in the world. It has a coal seam that is 400 to 500 plus feet thick over a vast region. You would have had to have over a mile deep of dead decaying matter floating on top of the water. And then as it's sinking, it's getting the pressure, and the further it gets down onto the ground level, it's getting smushed until it becomes the coal. Keep this in mind when we're looking at moon pool theory, because some people are like, oh, how did they get fresh water in the ark? Oh, they got a moon pool. They would put their debris and their waste in there, and then when the tides went out, it would take all that nasty stuff and it would give them a nice, clean area to work with. Well, one, we're not told that there was any other opening in the ark. 2, moon pool theory might work if we only have 10 feet of debris floating around the surface. But what happens when we get lower than, say, the ark, it's 50 feet tall, plus or minus, there's some extra space there. But if it's sitting halfway in the ground, 25 feet of it's underwater. What happens if we go 50 feet of decaying debris? What's going to happen with a moon pool? Is it going to take away any debris? No. And things like to travel the path of least resistance. As the debris down here doesn't have anywhere to go, it's going to try to push up through there. You're going to get noxious gases floating into the ark through the moon pool that's supposed to be taking the stuff away. And then if you have a mile of debris, the water ain't even getting close to that moon pool. So moon pool theory, based on the amount of coal that we're seeing, not really a viable theory. As they're doing this recent scans, it would appear that there was a double hull in the boat, and within that double hull there is a large empty space. One of my theories is that possibly that large empty space that surrounded the whole boat would have been filled with water, and then using a similar piping system, you could have water circulate around. We don't really know where they got their fresh water from. That's a theory. Some people say, well, they had vats. Well, even if you had very, very large vats of water, that's not going to be enough water to last you the whole year-long journey. So it may have been a miracle, just like Elijah and the widow. Every day she opened up that pot, there's the flour and the oil that she needed. We really don't know where the water came from. But as far as a moon pool goes, doesn't really seem to be a viable theory if you take into account that they weren't just floating on a big ocean. There was a lot of stuff inside of the ocean, the remnants of this very violent storm. All right, any questions? Question in the back. Why is there what? I didn't hear. Fruit?
It looks like strawberries.
Oh, those are my version of fish that went belly up. They do kind of look like strawberries, though. Yeah, I didn't want to put skeletons up because sometimes when I put skeletons up, it makes little kids get scared. So I'd be cautious when I put skeletons up, and I put a warning. Any other questions?
Do you know what the event was that happened to people? Was that when the earth tilted?
No, that would have been afterwards. It could have been related to a tilt shift because they were experiencing these, and they were experiencing earthquakes. I mean, the world is still reeling today from the flood. We're still feeling the effects. We just don't realize how much we're still feeling the effects. because every bit of ocean that we have, we're told, there were no large oceans before the flood. There was bodies of water that were spaced throughout, but there were no large oceans. So what we are seeing today, the earth right now is 70% water, 30% land. That's probably the exact opposite of what it was previously. There's probably a whole lot more land that we're missing out on. Any other questions? All right, so if we do it really, really, really fast, we've got a craft. So our own little terrarium jars, remaking Earth after the flood. So we can do some terrarium jars, and then first we're going to have prayer. And then what time is the wagon coming? Wagon's coming at 8:45, and it's going to meet here or at the other end of the parking lot. Okay, so we're going to try to finish by like 8:30 with our craft, 8:35, so that gives you a little bit of time to get over to the wagon. So bow our heads. Lord, thank you for allowing the computer to work so that we could share. Thank you so much for allowing us all to be here. And as we are winding down for this weekend and we're packing up and people are preparing to go their various ways, please be with everyone in their travels and throughout the rest of the year and the week, or just until everybody can get back together again. In your name we pray, amen. All right. So let's go get some craft done.